G'day and welcome to this topic that we're doing at the moment on the secret to learner engagement in e-learning, and we're going to do some revelations around that topic. It's great to be here with you all. For those that don't know me, I'm Mark Bailye. I'm a Senior Director of Customer Success at Open LMS Learning, and just a quick bit of background about me. Just to let you know that, like many of you, are really passionate about transforming lives through the effective use of technology-enhanced learning. Been doing this for a long time across many of the education sectors, both locally and internationally, and really here as an educator and thought leader who really loves to inform, inspire, invent, and innovate. And currently based in Adelaide, South Australia. So we've got a really interesting topic that I want to discuss with you today, and we're really going to do it following this format. We're going to firstly start by setting some context, and then we're going to really launch into learner engagement in e-learning. And as we do that, we're going to tackle the subject from three different ways. In fact, we're going to ask three questions. Why is learner engagement in e-learning important? We're then going to look at what actually do we mean by learner engagement in e-learning or online learning. And finally, as we round off the session, just look at how do we know when learners are engaged. And then at the end, we'll have some time for some questions and answers. So as we think about the context, we all know that the impact of COVID-19 and what that's had on all of us. It's come suddenly, it's come unexpectedly, and it's amazing what that's done in terms of the online learning and teaching. And as a result, it's really forced many of us into the digital world. And to be honest, it's in the case of many of us, we haven't really been well prepared for it. And what it means is that a lot of us have had to rapidly move to a format that is suitable for online learning. There's a shift that we've had to think about. It's almost like an emergency fix, so to speak. And whether we've moved to a completely online or blended learning, what we're finding is that a number of us have had to move quickly, and a number of us didn't have the technology or skill set to be able to do so. And so for many of us, it's been a really steep learning curve. And as we think about that, I just want you to think about this question, and if you get a chance, just pop it in the chat and I'll respond, because this is a recording, so I'll be actively being in the chat and able to respond. But just think about this question for a moment. What impact has the rapid conversion to e-learning had on learner engagement? What do you think the impact's been on the learner engagement? Well, let's consider this first question. Why is learner engagement important? Well, researchers have revealed, and we all know this, that there's that strong correlation between learner engagement and retention. The more students are engaged in their learning, we know that more likely they're going to achieve and complete their studies. Florence Martin and Doris Bollinger published an article in 2018 that highlighted that engagement matters. And based on their research, they identified why learner engagement in online courses is important. And they identified four things. The first of those is that it increases learner satisfaction. It also enhances the learner's motivation to learn. It also reduces the sense of isolation. And finally, it improves the learner's performance in e-learning. All strong reasons for why we need to ensure that as we move into this post-COVID world, we think about the impact of what we're doing and the impact that is having on learner engagement. So that's what we need to think about. And so as we think about the impact of COVID-19, I really love this article by Educause where they identify these top issues. But more importantly for us as educators, what does that mean in terms of what we're doing? For many of us, have we now chosen to evolve, or have we chosen to go down the transform path? For most of us, we've sort of been forced into that evolvement. We've been forced to adapt to the new normal. And as we said before, some of us have been ready and some of us haven't been. So it's been a quick upskill to ensure that we're adapting to this new normal. But having done this rapid shift, a lot of us also are now at this stage of thinking about transformation, thinking about now that we're familiar with this new space, is it time to redefine and innovate for the future? And so this is a challenge many of us are now facing. And it's why we've highlighted the end part there, because that's where the focus is as we move forward. It's the expectation of our students as we moved into this digital transformation era in terms of how we ensure that we use technologies effectively to engage our students. And so as we think about that, we now understand that learner engagement is critical. We know that if they're not engaged, then if they are engaged, then they're likely to be successful. And we know from experience that our learners take an active role in their learning. And therefore, the potential that technology can play must be to improve student engagement. And we know that this has been recognised from many of us for some time. And so as we think about this, we now need to think about what's the role of the LMS. Here we all know quality matters, where it tells us that a well-defined course is more likely to engage learners and positively affect their performance. So with this rapid shift to online learning or e-learning, whether that's fully online or hybrid, at the heart of everything that we do is ensuring that we're creating courses that are well designed, that we're creating experiences for our students that are enriching and enhancing their learning experience. Because the more we can do that, the more we get them actively involved and engaged, then the better outcomes it is for students. And so we need to ensure that when we're using technology, we need to remember that technology plus students doesn't equal engagement. And therefore, we need to take the right approach. It requires us to think strongly about our pedagogy. What approaches to learning are we taking? And then how do we use the technology to enhance that? How do we use that skill set to create courses that are well designed based on this sound pedagogy? Because if we don't do that, then more likely we're promoting disengagement and will impede rather than positively affect performance. And so as we think about that, let's move on to our second question. What is learner engagement in e-learning? And particularly in the online learning space, this is an area that many struggle to define. I came across an interesting discussion paper by Gregory Kennedy. It's a paper he wrote in 2020 where he focused on this very topic. And the question he was considering was, why is student engagement in online learning? What is, student engagement in online learning? And how do I know when it's there? And what was interesting in his discussion paper is he really focused on three perspectives. He focused on interaction, interactivity, and learning design, all of which are really interesting and require our thoughtfulness, particularly when it comes to designing for student engagement. Let's just remember that for a lot of us, we had to rapidly move into this online or e-learning world. As lecturers, teachers, many of us were thrown a blank course like the one in front of us and told to go forth and create a well-designed course that encourages student engagement. And we have had to do so with little experience in this space, with little experience into how to design courses effectively that engage students. And more importantly, how do we design courses that encompass those three aspects that we just spoke about? Where do you start? It's difficult and it can be daunting, but I really hope in the time that we have left is really to reveal some secrets around the approach as we think about these three perspectives. And so as we think about this interaction perspective on learner engagement, it's interesting that Gregory draws on the work of Moore, where he defines that there's these three types of interactions that should be inherent in effective online courses. And these are the three. It's that learner to instruction interaction, it's that learner to learner interaction, and it's the learner to content interaction. Now, as we think about those three, which of the three do you think is most important? So perhaps we can pose that one to the chat. Which interaction do you think has the biggest impact on the learner engagement according to learners? Do you think it's the learner instructor, the learner to learner, or the learner to content? Just pop your answer in the chat. Which interaction do you think has the biggest impact on learner engagement? It's certainly an interesting question to ponder. And as we think about that, Florence Martin and Doris Bollinger, in their work that I quoted earlier, found in their study that the learner instructor was the most effective, followed closely by the learner content interaction, and then lastly, the learner to learner. And so that was the perceptions of students in terms of the importance of the engagement strategies in an online learning environment. And so when we think about that, we really need to think back to what is this learner-instructor interaction? And more importantly, we need to find ways to incorporate all the three of these in our courses in order for student learner engagement to be effective. And so as we think about the first one, this learner instructor, what their research went on to show was the interaction that was taking place was because lecturers were regularly posting announcements, sending out reminders, letting learners know of important things that were coming up, or providing weekly updates on things that the learners needed to do. The other big thing that this interaction was incorporating was providing grading rubrics for all assignments. And so we know that obviously anything around assessment is pivotal, and therefore instructors being able to interact and respond to students, as we see next in forums, to any questions that students might have. It could be in relation to the assessment, in relation to the content, or things that students needed to do. And finally, providing feedback using various means and modalities was also considered really, really important. Whether that was via discussion forums, perhaps it was a personal chat message, perhaps it was in a virtual classroom where the opportunity to raise questions and respond to different scenarios and questions was considered really, really important. And so we see that it's really important for instructors in this perspective or interaction to really establish online presence. That's really critical for learners. They need to be able to interact with these instructors, whether it be weekly videos, regular announcements, timely feedback, or available, as I said before, for regular synchronous or asynchronous interactions. When we think about the learner-to-learner interactions, some of the key things that students found help with engagement was at the start of their courses being able to introduce themselves using icebreakers in discussions. Being able to work collaboratively on case studies and projects and reports. And again, that could be through synchronous means, whether it be online virtual classrooms, online chat type sessions, or whether it was asynchronously through discussion forums or wikis and those types of things. Students considered interactions with peers during learner presentations as, again, an important factor, as well as the opportunity to select readings and participate in various discussion groups. These things were all considered really, really important for that learner-to-learner interaction. And then finally, the learner content interaction. So students being able to actively get involved with working on realistic scenarios. Anything that was authentic really enabled students to interact and engage. Discussions that were structured around guided questions were also considered really, really fundamental for student engagement. Interaction with content in more than one format was also considered critical, given now that students are often working remotely, they need flexibility. Students need to be provided with the flexibility to not just download content to read, but also have the ability to perhaps listen to it or interact with it from any device at any time, anywhere. And then finally, optional online resources to explore the topic were also seen as really, really important. And so we see that activities, particularly learning activities that enrich and enhance learning, were activities that seem to appeal to students and keep them actively involved. Now, the second perspective that was mentioned in the discussion was around interactivity perspective. And this really incorporates two things. One is there's this focus around behavioural engagement. So it's thinking about how learners, when they log into an environment, let's take the learning management system for an example, not only do they log in, but they then navigate, they then look for content, they perhaps read it, they maybe download it. Is that what we mean by interactivity? Is that the type of engagement that we're looking for to keep our learners really actively involved in their learning, giving them those triggers that are going to spark action that lead to achievement? Or are we really focusing on activities that are focused around cognitive engagement? It's that idea that we're providing our learners with an opportunities to reflect, to think about, to work through the learning material at a deeper level. And so we need to think about how we find ways to incorporate both of these, particularly learning activities that are cognitively engaging for our learners. Because if we can do this well, then our learners will be actively involved in their learning. And I think the secret to all this is around active learning and what that means and how we go about creating that in our courses. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So then as we think about this third perspective, which is the learning design, whenever I work with academics and teachers or instructors around course design, as we think about their learning, I always go back to the basics. It's an area that I'm really passionate about because I think it's an area that you can be extremely creative and innovative in. And I always go back to getting people to think about this backwards by design model. When you're designing a course, just think about these four things. Not only do you need to identify what the learning outcomes are, but we then need to think about how we're going to evaluate the learning. What are the assessment tasks that we need to do to demonstrate that our learners have obtained the required knowledge and skills? And in order for them to do that, we need to think about how we're going to engage learners throughout the course. What are the learning activities we need to create that are really going to take students and really push at that cognitive and behavioural type perspective, to combine both aspects of that, to also combine aspects of learner to learner, learner to instructor, learner to content perspectives within the course. And then, of course, we need to think about how we provide content. So as I mentioned before, one of the areas or the secret, I believe, is thinking about how do we get students engaged by getting them involved in active learning. And we know it requires that higher order of thinking. And often in online or e-learning, it can be difficult to apply. And so what we need to think about in any learning activities, particularly or assessment tasks that we're creating, whether they be low stakes or high stakes type activities, we really need to think about this last or bottom area of Edgar Dale's cone of experience. We need to think about how do we get our students to think more deeply, to get them involved in critical thinking, that higher order of thinking, which is all around how we get them to analyze, define, create, and evaluate. And so we need to think about, in these learning activities where we want to engage our students, we need to think about how do we build in experiences that enable our learners to gain better understanding of a particular event or concept, almost like as if type scenarios. Or perhaps another thing we need to focus on is how do we provide them with experiences that are closely related to reality? In other words, we're providing students with more concrete experiences, more authentic experiences. And then finally, as we think about engaging our learners, thinking about how do we get the learner involved in activities by doing them themselves, by allowing learners to go through the motions like an actual hands-on experience. They're the types of things that we need to be thinking about as we try and get our learners more actively involved in their learning. And this is where we need to focus on that learning design. So what does that mean for us when we think about the technologies that we have available? How are we using them effectively to achieve this? And we know that the LMS influences the design and pedagogy of online courses. And therefore, we really need to think about the learner experience. How do we make full use of the tools, the functionality, the features that are in a learning management system? How do we maximize those to create real learning value for our students, where we can create those engaging experiences for them? And again, it gets back to how well we design our courses, thinking first about what are the pedagogies that we want to introduce, and then how do we use the technology to enhance the learning. And as we all know, that's the approach that we need to take. We need to think about those aspects when we're designing our learning. And so that is why course design becomes really, really important. It's why a lot of institutions are getting more instructional designers to come in and help in this area of the work, to ensure that our courses are in fact incorporating elements of active learning, of collaboration, and of authenticity, particularly around the assessment tasks that we get our students to do, to ensure that when our learners leave, they have the skills, they have particularly the digital skills they need to perform well when they leave in their careers as they move forward. And so as we think about this, there are probably three things that we can think about. First of all is connect learners with each other so they can learn together. So we need to think of ways that as we're building or as we're designing our courses, we're thinking about where are our learners going to connect? How are they going to work with each other? How are they going to share their insights and expertise and support one another? So we need to think about what tools do we have available that are going to do that well. And we know that we have tools within the learning management system that can do that effectively to both engage with students in a synchronous and synchronous type in environments. So we need to give that strong consideration. In addition to that, we also need to think about how do we captivate and challenge learners? And again, there's lots of ways to do this. For many of us, this could be new. And I want to point out that often there could be low-cost solutions that enable us to do this just as effectively. For example, when we think about the experience that can be gained through virtual reality, using something like a Google Cardboard glasses with our phones can be just as effective as some of the other things that we can do. And what we see as evidenced by this photo, we can see our students are actively involved in the learning. There's opportunity to then create experiences that then can be reflected upon and then enabled to have those interactions, whether it be peer-to-peer. And so what we find is these types of activities encourage social learning. They encourage that peer-to-peer type learning. Again, all important information and part of this learning journey that gets our students actively involved and fully engaged in that experience. So again, here's another example here of a course that's been designed to actively involve students in their learning. And here we've got learning activities that are cognitive engaging for our students. This is a course that's been designed with a focus on autism, and I'll just run you through just to show how you can engage students. So here we see students again presented with critical information. They've got assessments coming up. They now jump into their course. In this case, it's a course focused on autism. We see some personalization occurring. And now when we're into the course, we see that students are presented with information. Information in this case here that they can read. They've got quizzes that they can do multiple times to test their understanding, to ensure that they can come up with information and understand under the right understandings. And again, providing students with the opportunity to do that multiple times really tests their understanding. Providing opportunities where students can go in and read not only or interact with resources that have been provided not only by instructors, but also by their peers, where they've been able to identify interesting resources and put them in here to share with other students. Really, really important as part of this learning, as part of this social interaction and collaboration with other students. And as we can see there, they can add the new entry and add their own. We can see other areas of interaction around discussions where, in this case here, students can now reflect on their learning. They come to a point based on their own information gathering that they've been able to come up with their own reflection of what it would be like to have autism. And so they post that to the forum. They have opportunity to read responses from other students. And as they reflect on what they think it's going to be like, we then have another learning moment that we introduce, where here students are given those Google Cardboard glasses, and here provided with a VR experience where they can go in and think about what it's like to experience someone who has autism. And so now we can go back and see that having come up with what they think it would look like and to now experience, we now have a great way to think about this cognitive learning where students now reflect on the two, where it's not only just what they thought it would be like, but now having experienced it, what a great way to think deeply about it. And then furthermore, to discuss this with their peers in their groups. And at the end of this, they've been able to really understand more meaning from the topic through this experience. Not only what they've learnt along the way through their own journey, but through their interactions, not only with the content, but also with their peers, and to have that then reinforced through interactions with instructor makes this a really amazing learning experience. And so we see that the students have had a trigger, they've actively got involved and acted upon that, and then they've had, they feel as though they've achieved something. They've had a greater sense of being able to reach that milestone, and then because of that, the sense of achievement are going to be more geared to become actively involved in the next learning activity or challenge that you set them. So again, we also need to think about how we give our learners their own learner journey. So again, we've got to think about how do we personalize the learning experience for our students. And again, there's a lot of ways that this is being achieved through different learning objects that require or enable students to actively get involved in learning. Often a lot of these are very much scenario based. So what would you do? And learners can go in and interact and become fully entrenched in this learning moment, as we'll see in this experience here. Where here it's again going in, looking at this house that's being developed, where they need to then go in and make some decisions. And so what we find with these types of situations that are really more personalized because of the student interaction, what it means is that our learners become more focused on exactly what they need to do. And it also means that our learners just aren't doing stuff that feels as though it's wasting their time. They've been able to focus in on learning activities and learning content that is going to add value to what they're doing. And so it's really important that where possible, we incorporate these types of experiences. And again, there's lots of ways that we can do that. And within the learning management systems, we see a big take-up of H5P particularly because it's a tool that most lecturers and instructors can use to create this engaging content these engaging experiences that enable students to get fully involved, where they can fully interact, and it really enriches the learning that's taking place. So again, we need to be able to find ways to incorporate these types of things in our courses. Again, thinking about establishing own learning journeys and the need for establishing or incorporating students' choice to, again, help them become more engaged. So going back to that autistic example, here we find that there's an assessment exercise that is authentic. Students are here asked to pick a famous character or pick someone famous that has autism, and to really carry out a study. Not only can they pick their character or person, they can pick their groups, and they can have opportunities here through, again, quizzes to calibrate or test their knowledge and really interact. Understand what it means to create a good video and really understand what that rubric is like. And once they get through this exercise, where they are able to focus on the individual and create that short video, they then get presented with a case-based learning module just to really cement that, where they're given an authentic scenario to consider to ensure that the skills and knowledge that they've picked up, they're again able to interact with the course. Thinking about well-designed courses, as we've seen in these two examples here, whether it be in the learning activities, whether it be in the assessment tasks, are really paramount to ensuring student or learner success when it comes to our online or hybrid learning courses or e-learning, simply because we've been able to get our students and learners actively involved in the process. And so how do we know when our learners are engaged? In fact, it's a question I'll pose to all of you that are listening. Think about how do you know learners are engaged? Think about those scenarios down the bottom, because you may think of those circumstances that you can identify when learners are engaged. But more importantly, just put it in the chat. How do you know when learners are engaged? Well, I'm assuming that a lot of you have quickly identified that analytic tools really help us in this space, particularly the tools that are available in learning management systems, where there are often many types of different reports that can help us really focus on learner engagement. The real important thing that I emphasize to almost everyone I talk to is we need to understand what activity is occurring in the course in order to identify if students are engaged or disengaged. And therefore, we really need to focus on how do we increase engagement before it's too late. And our analytics are only as good as how well our courses have been designed. Again, designed based on those three elements I spoke about before, with those three different perspectives. When we think about the interaction that takes place, whether it be between learner and learner, learner-instructor, learner and content, we need to think about that interactivity that is taking place. And then, of course, we need to think about how we design our courses to really focus on those pedagogical learning approaches that are going to enable that to happen, to enable us to use the right tools to generate that active learning that is needed to engage our students. So again, that goes back to what I believe is the secret, and it's this real focus around active learning. And so we need to look at our courses. We must increase engagement and get our learners actively involved. And the way we do that is by designing learning that encourages cognitive engagement. And again, there are a lot of reports within the LMS that will help us identify those engaging type activities. When we can look at things like our discussion forums, our glossaries, our lessons, our quizzes, our interactive elements, whether it be VR, whether it be our learning objects, HIP, whatever, we can see that there are lots of ways that we can do it. But again, going back to the core of what we've been talking about is we need to ensure that we're designing learning that encourages cognitive engagement. So again, just like to give a big thank you for all of you for staying and listening. Hopefully that's been helpful as you think about e-learning and designing for that, with a real focus on learner engagement. And again, there's probably a few moments for a couple of questions. So again, thank you all.